Hi everyone, and welcome to Apptica Talks podcast this week. Today we are having with us Marc Bearman, VP Commercial from oolo. Hi Marc, how are you today?
Good, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure. So as oolo is a new product, relatively new product in the market, I'm particularly interested in solutions you're offering. Just before we start with our primary topic, let's talk a bit about you, your career, your projects you're currently working on, and solutions that oolo has right now.
Yeah, sure. So, as you say, my name's Marc Bearman. I'm VP of Commercial for oolo, a smart monitoring platform designed specifically for monetization and growth teams at application and game developers. So, I guess a little bit about my history. So, I've been in the mobile in-app space for the last 10 years, working at companies like Unity. I was in charge of their account management team, so a lot of their existing customers. Most recently, I was at Mopub leading business development for their mediation platform. So very much focused on the gaming, monetization and UA side. Obviously, my most recent role, I joined oolo back in start of last year. And again, have been very focused on the gaming market, as that's where a big chunk of my expertise is. And for oolo, we've been a company, I'd say, since 2020. And focused on, I'd say traditionally on the monetization use case. So for the last few years, monetization was a big part of our focus. I think to your comment, as a relatively new product, we released our user acquisition monitoring platform a few months ago. And obviously we're scaling that up and have had, I'd say, really good adoption across our customers. You talked a little bit about projects. Obviously, as a data company, we're always looking to improve the use cases and problems that we're solving for our customers, but we're also starting to provide more insights and competitive analysis for our customers so that they can understand how they're performing against the market, and we can help them optimize and improve their results, whether that's the product or game itself, their UA strategy, or monetization kind of health and setup.
So currently you are developing two directions, UA and monetization at the same time. So great, that's why in this episode Apptica talks about combined trends in UA and monetization. I would like to start with UA as it's relatively new, so let's briefly expand on the trends we are witnessing in the market from the UA perspective, and more particularly I would like to ask about publishers, how they feel now in the market, considering this tough competition, and how to optimize the share of voice, how to get a bigger share, a bigger piece of pie of this market. So what to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably talk on this topic for the whole webinar.
Yes.
So yeah, I think everyone is everyone's looking for the crystal ball to work out exactly what makes sense. But I guess I'll take a few seconds to comment on what we're seeing, maybe to give some background context for the audience. So, I think there's been a lot of challenges in the last, 12 plus months. We saw coming out of COVID and lockdowns all around the world, a regression to the mean. So we saw that increase in user activity start to normalize quite significantly, which just meant that there was a reduction in addressable users that were really engaging on mobile platforms. So that compressed the sort of volumes that a lot of advertisers were able to achieve. At the same time, Apple disrupted the industry quite significantly with obviously a bunch of privacy changes. I mean, I'd say it's great to see such a significant player in the market taking a consumer first stance on privacy and trying to help users control their privacy. But it has meant it's much more complicated and in many cases less profitable to buy on iOS because it's harder to target those higher value customers. So what we have seen is a lot of companies have been competing a bit more aggressively on Google Play, so focusing on Android stores and neglecting iOS to some degree. Now, in terms of trends, obviously privacy is quite important. it's very likely that we're going to see Google, they've got their privacy sandbox and also other, potential changes they're going to make. Maybe not to have parity with what Apple are doing, but at least to address that, real privacy need in market for their users. So there probably is some increased complexity coming from Android. Hopefully not as dramatic as what we've seen with Apple. But it does mean there's pressure is being put on all these different places. So I think what we're seeing in terms of like trends, or at least of where advertisers are spending more time, or at least mind share, is new platforms or platforms that are growing. Obviously TikTok is a well-established player, but it is hard to operate on their ads business. Not necessarily for everyone, but TikTok as a platform, you need to be uploading 25 new creatives very regularly to try and leverage some of that virality. So a lot of advertisers are trying to work out their strategy for platforms like TikTok and to be able to touch those users and ultimately access them. I think interestingly what we're seeing from some of the bigger players in the market is consolidation as an effective user acquisition strategy. So if you look at Take-Two, obviously Take-Two owns Zynga, Social Point, the list is too long to go through on the call. And then obviously underneath Zynga, they bought Rollic's bought Popcore, all these studios are disappearing in a way, and potentially because it's a very easy way to buy users and revenue overnight.
Yeah, and there were some talks, if I'm not mistaken, between Rovio and Playtika about some takeover, but I believe that they haven't sealed the deal, but still there were some movements about consolidation.
Yes.
And
So I think I saw an article from Pocket Gamer or someone like that in the last week that says the deal's probably not going to happen. But yeah, that's pretty indicative, right? So Playtika bought Seriously, like the Finnish studio, which bit of bad PR there, but ultimately that's rolled into Playtika. They bought Super Treat and a bunch of other different studios. So on a smaller scale, Playtika have been playing a very similar strategy, which is if, let's take the Popcore example. So I say Popcore is, a lot of people miscategorize them as hyper casual. I'd say they're bleeding more into hybrid casual and have been doing it for a long time before it's become a more trendy buzzword. But it was a type of game and dimension that maybe Rollic wasn't as fortified in, not something that Zynga had focused on. So in the current market, do you spend a lot of money trying to build a studio and learn the expertise to enter a new segment or a new type of gaming, or do you just buy the studio? It's not.
yeah, it's easier.
It's not a luxury that everyone can afford, but I think we're going to see that trend. I think it will slow down a little bit now. I think, again, the context on that, the M&A market has obviously dropped off quite significantly because of just economical market pressures, right? A lot of companies are under pressure to be profitable. There are a lot of layoffs happening at big studios, big technology companies, as we've all seen. So that's definitely slowed down, but I don't think it will stop. And maybe as the economy recovers over the next few years, that acquisition trend will probably pick back up. Whether it's a good long-term strategy, I don't know. Because, for example, Voodoo, very much considered the leader in hyper-casual, have been pretty vocal in the last 6 months that hyper-casual is on its way out. They're shifting to hybrid casual, with mob control being a successful example. If you bought Voodoo to become the leader in hyper casual, you'd now be it would be a risk, right? That you've already seen that business method has been displaced. And I do think inherently gaming changes. It's a bit like organic virality. Trends are evolving all of the time. And I think it's a diversified business is key, though. So I think this acquisition strategy really plays into diversification for these big studios that could potentially become less relevant.
Yes, and agile channel strategy, I guess, as well. Just to try several channels, as you've mentioned. Apart from iOS and Google, we have TikTok, we have influence marketing, we have cross-platform, I guess, strategies, just to put some ads within your existing titles. But here, again, it's quite tricky not to lose your retention level, but still. And also, while you were talking, I had in mind one thought about Playtika again, and about these market trends. I also saw in some articles that Playtika stopped developing and launching new titles, and they put focus on high growth potential studios. So again, their focus now is on buying new studios rather than on creating their own titles. Of course, Vuga and Playtika, maybe they're analyzing some games, but they won't invest a lot in new games. And it's, I guess, a big trend now. And you had this phrase while we were discussing the episode, growth over profit is dying, or something like that. I don't know whether it's applicable here, so I didn't quite understand what you meant by that. Maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that as an overarching theme, you can kind of expand that a few ways. But if we take the hyper-casual example, right, it was obviously the hyper-casual is a business model. It's not necessarily a game type. It's about obviously retaining users for a period of time, showing them enough ads for that to be profitable, given that you buy them cheap enough to do so. Now, that model relies on scale, right? So you're making a very fractional profit on every user, but you're buying millions of them. Now, in that hyper-casual competition, obviously some companies are top of the charts all the time, some lower down. And it's not necessarily just based on the game being better or the monetization being better. Some companies are willing to take less profit at higher scale because they can afford to buy that scale. You know, there are cases where some companies are willing to break even or lose some money on projects for a period of time to get to certain positions in the store or a certain amount of success. These are, and that's just not just hyper casual. This applies to all segments, that every company makes a decision how profitable or how not profitable they are willing to be, right? So just on an economic perspective, what is the minimum margin I want to make on every user that comes into my environment? That's generally a signal of an immature market where companies, it's very subjective, that over time, what you should see is relatively consistent low margins across the board, or at least a pretty static margin. What we're seeing is an industry coming to maturity where companies can't afford to burn cash for vanity metrics, to be hyper successful in terms of downloads. So everyone's looking a lot more like at profitability, a lot more in the short term. There's a lot of market uncertainty. So we're definitely seeing less and less companies competing in hyper casual. Even for hybrid casual, a lot more companies, or there's a lot more conservatism when launching and scaling products, that it's actually paying back in terms of true profit. So although it is quite general, we're definitely seeing a maturing with how companies look at growth and monetization.
And if we just get back a bit to the point of the market, I mean the competition. The competition is tough, and we have oversaturation of the market. What's the place for startups then? So because we have these huge players like Playtika, Voodoo that we were talking about, but still in Apptica we see new releases every week, every day, by publishers, like by freshmen, as we call them. So it's just a new publisher, or some companies that are doing self-publishing. Still they exist, they invest in their titles and their games, and they're not afraid of this competition. I don't know whether it's a mature position or not, so what's your stance on that?
Well, it's definitely harder. So when you look at the number, like the companies that are still releasing games and competing, there is a slight opportunity that there's been a market correction. So a lot of companies are moving away, right? And that panic does mean that there could be a bit more of an opportunity than maybe there was 3 or 6 months ago. There will be a subsection of those where it's just inexperience and immaturity to the specific space. So they're willing to risk some money to learn how to be successful, right? So a lot of these companies over the next 3 to 6 months will go on a journey where they work out if they can do something unique that allows them, to be profitable in this new reality. But it's just very difficult for startups now. And that's not just gaming. I mean, technology in general there's never been more companies, offering so many nuanced solutions or approaches to a problem. So in gaming, there's not many ideas that haven't been had, unless there's a paradigm shift. Obviously, Web3, let's say, people are still trying to work out what that means and exactly what it means to be successful in that environment. So there are paradigm shifts where maybe you can come up with something really new and compelling, but within the current kind of, call it vertical of mobile gaming, traditional gaming, is like you're kind of reskinning things that have been done, evolving ideas that already exist. It's much harder to be different or unique than it has been in the past. Similarly, in the technology space, there's about 1,000,001 companies that utilize ChatGPT for some purpose, right? So to create, mid-journey, like there's lots of great use cases, like designing characters, like visual, graphical content. There are some really good ones. But there's a lot, creating cooking recipes and, business presentations. There's 1,000,000 of them. So to be differentiated in that space is quite difficult without significant investment. Because there are some ideas that are, of course, everyone agrees it would be great if you could solve this problem. Most of those mean there's a high cost of entry, right? Very high cost to get things going. So I wouldn't say it's the most exciting time to consider starting a startup, but it's never been easy. I think the last, few years has been a bit inflated with how easy it might be to enter and get some success. So to me, it's a bit of a normalization, but I think definitely the companies that will be successful that are starting now are ones that are lean, relatively conservative, and take a data-first approach to what they invest their time in. Like the same rules still apply. You need to iterate quickly and cut the project if the data's not telling a promising story very early.
It's a bit discouraging for those who are listening us. I guess maybe some small game studios just listening to get some insights or maybe some recommendations, and we're like, okay, so it's not the best time.
Well, I'd say reality is not always positive with flowers on top, but at the same time, companies that have expertise in making games, if they can make it work with the more casual end of the spectrum, great. But definitely hybrid casual has proven that it's here to stay for a long time. Like creating higher value, let's say higher value games, higher production value, a stronger economy. So, building some reason to spend money, to watch ads, and a more balanced approach to monetization definitely works. So if I was a founder of a game, like a startup game studio now, there's plenty of time to pivot into areas that have success. If you can be successful in hyper casual, great. I'd say if you can adjust business and become slightly more hybrid casual and be successful, also great. It's just, I think, being aware of the reality of the difficulties based on your segment and being prepared to adjust strategy if it doesn't work. I think the days of releasing a project of pure joy, it used to be you could come up with an idea that you loved and you could push it. Now I think your opinion is less relevant because the data really tells the true story. There's a lot of pressure on actual performance versus like your personal opinion on what you think would make a great game, which, depends how you want to run your business. Maybe that's a little bit depressing for you if you're someone who really loves games. I think that mindset still exists in the very IAP first world, the far less casual end of the spectrum. So you just need to align your focus segment on what your motivations for making games is.
Yes, the environment is quite hostile, but still there is this place, I guess, a niche that could be taken, and I guess some studios could be successful.
Yeah,
anyways,
I mean,
if the approach is right.
I would say as one last comment, like market maturation, unfortunately, it does make less dynamic and maybe slightly more hostile environments, because there's things have been tried, tested, there's processes. If you look at the finance market, right, obviously been around longer, standardized, very regulated, it's harder to disrupt, companies work in a certain way. And to some degree, you need a certain stability with how things operate. So it increases transparency, efficiency. So I do think that the current process will lead us to an interesting place. But the good thing about gaming, there's always going to be a creative element. And I think the companies that will succeed are always ones that are looking for something new and different to do. So there's no reason to give up on your passion as a result of my comments. It's definitely just the business model behind. There's a lot of pressure on making sure that works alongside making great games.
Yes, so we support. So it's not like we are sounding a bit discouraging now. Just we support ideas.
I make my living kind of supporting game studios in making great content. So I'm very passionate about mobile gaming. Just definitely the growth and monetization side is evolving quite a lot.
Okay, so also while talking, you mentioned diversification part. So, and we can apply that this term not only to UA strategy but also to monetization strategy. So advertisers and publishers, so they're trying to diversify not only their channels, of user acquisition, but also the revenue channels, how to get the revenue. And here we have several also options.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, and still there are a lot of talks about in-app purchase or in-app advertisement, what to choose, where to put a bigger share, what is more profitable. What's your expertise? What do you see based maybe on your client's case? Mm-hmm. So what to choose, subscription, freemium model, cross-portfolio, or IAP or IAA?
Yep.
So what to do?
Yeah, obviously your starting point or where you are right now is quite important to what your options are. But definitely from seeing people go from more casual to more IAA focused to blended or moving towards IAP, obviously a lot of companies are learning that expertise about how to create value in the economy, to best place items for conversion, and just generally learning some of what the middle or the more casual the less casual games already know, which is how to monetize effectively with IAP. So I think that's just a learning path you have to go on. I don't think there is, obviously you can design games around the monetization mechanic, so it will definitely involve some new elements for studios to look at, which is, to some degree, you can put ads in most games, right? Of course, you can customize them and design them to be a more hospitable environment for ads. But generally, if you want to, you can stick ads in most things with relatively small adjustments. IAP is definitely not the same situation. It definitely requires a lot more thoughtfulness that goes into it. So the pre-design before you sort of launch needs a lot more considerations, I think. But to speak about your question maybe a bit more about our opinions around diversification, there's a few things that I think are happening, which is subscription is definitely becoming a more common mechanism that companies try to utilize, and I definitely think it makes some sense, right? Because if you look at the SaaS market, a lot of these companies have traditionally had high accelerators on their value based on recurring revenue because it's very predictable, right? It's like, okay, you have 1,000 customers that are making you $20 a month. Like, take a Netflix example. Like, of course, subscription revenue is great for predicting your profit compared to IAP, where you kind of predict what purchases should happen, right? You need to be very sophisticated. Whereas with subscription, is like, okay, 1,000 new people sign up to the subscription every day. That on average they stay for 35 days and then they stop subscribing. It's very easy to sort of take those, macro level numbers and build predictions. So the motivation for subscription is very clear. How to implement that is obviously a learning curve that companies are going through now, which is, how do you create, because IAP, you have to create a value in your environment or economy where people want to spend money. With subscription, they obviously need to spend money, but it's kind of anchored to the predicate that you need them to come back all of the time, right? So if you're paying, let's use the example of Netflix. If you're paying $10 a month for Netflix, the reason you're paying is not because of a one-time off you're going to use Netflix. It's because you're probably going to use it 2 or 3 times a week to binge watch some TV program, right? You're getting some ongoing value. So designing an economy around longer-term value can be challenging, because most games are free. So what are you trying to add into that environment that allows you to charge them money and in the longer term? So I think that's a really exciting area. A lot of companies are playing with that. I think it's more common in non-gaming apps at the moment, because it's quite easy to see if you've got, a shopping app where you get unlimited free delivery, or a dating app where you get premium features. I think like Tinder and a few of the others use like some subscription features, coloring apps, language learning apps, something where it's related to your personal development, education, whatever it may be. I think it's much easier to sort of show the value, because these industries or these verticals haven't traditionally given anything away for free, or not so much. In the context of gaming, because there is this free to play as the common, dominating business model, it's a harder barrier to get over. So I don't think it's just about creating the value, it's about trying to get consumers willing to part ways. And I think there are some companies that are doing it well. The ones that probably see easier success are the ones that already have strong IAP revenues, right? Because if you're paying for regular purchases and I can offer you a subscription that gives you kind of a regular value that you might pay for, then it's a no-brainer and it gets you kind of locked in. Not every game has those mechanics, right? It's definitely something that needs to be factored in about how do you do it. Because I've seen some examples with colouring apps, right? So these colour by numbers apps where you touch the squares or the shapes and it colours them in. Very popular, people spend a lot of time, very popular to monetize with ads. And then what's your subscription? Obviously you can't offer remove ads as a subscription, but maybe you have some premium paintings that are offered by artists once a month, right? Some very exclusive content where you get those. So you get a certain amount new every month that you can colour, and you throttle the free experience. These are all considerations that need to be made, but I definitely think we're going to see subscriptions and the hybrid casual gaming segment interact somehow, to make it, to kind of bring those two mechanisms together, I think is valuable. Because hybrid casual is a higher production value and people play for longer, and that inherently lends itself to subscriptions, I think. Sorry, go on.
Perhaps we will start with freemium model. So you have some features, but you need just pay a bit amount of money for these, for example, pictures by artists, and you will get this option, you will get this feature. So, and maybe it will evolve in the future, yes, definitely.
I think so, because I think originally when Apple, obviously when the App Store was invented or released, there were some initial paid games that were higher quality. And then there were light versions, if you remember, where it was like, oh yeah, play this. And then there was an in-app purchase and you could unlock the pro version, which would have all the levels. obviously it didn't stay around as a business model because I think people were reluctant to pay. The conversion rates were low. But I think now, because you've got this, that upsell can be a subscription where it's like, hey, this is what you would get every month if you're paying, $5 or whatever it is. I think people are a lot more open because firstly, they're comfortable with microtransactions or paying on mobile. When the App Store was released, I think people were still unsure about like putting in credit card details and paying for things. The world's changed a little bit since then. So yeah, I definitely think that we'll see it happen. I think more and more companies are trying to crack this nut.
And among your current clients, do you see these trends to be on the rise? I mean, what strategies your clients are taking now, how they diversify their channels for user acquisition, what strategy they adhere in terms of monetization? Maybe you have some interesting insights to share.
Yeah, so I would say the subscription evolution is not happening like super quickly compared to other things because it's a bit more of a paradigm shift. You're moving from one way of doing things to something very different, which is very product led as well, right? It requires a lot of adaptation. So we work a lot with the monetization and growth teams directly, which don't necessarily have the autonomy for some of those decisions. They're part of the conversation. So what we're seeing around diversification and what they're doing, more directly within today's kind of way of doing things is, so firstly, everyone's always trying to optimize their ad stack, making sure that they have the best possible setup, that they haven't got issues, that they're using the right prices with different networks, they're working with the right partners, which is where we can help them, right? So we provide them a lot of data to make sure they have the best setup possible. What we're seeing as a more common trend right now is introduction of like new, call it ad formats or monetization formats that are outside of the current flow. So there's a few examples of this. There's obviously in-game ads, whether that's in-game native ads, ads that are placed in the spatial environment.
Gameplay, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So you often see like a billboard, and everything can be parallaxed, so it fits within the dimensions of the game. That's becoming more popular. I think there's a good example with Do Dreams, which is a Finnish studio that has a P2P kind of head-off racing game. You kind of have to crash your opponent off the course. They have these banner ads in the game, which is this native style, and it adds an additional revenue stream that doesn't affect retention or the user experience. So it's really welcome revenue. Doesn't work for every game, but it's becoming more common. I'd say also audio ads are becoming like I'd say not a hot button topic, but they're at the inflection point of becoming something serious. So there's a few different companies that are offering this. For example, there's a company called oolo, which is an Israeli-based network that are, I guess, more focused on gaming, that are offering these audio ads. Effectively, like it's not just like an audio ad that would play, but there might be some, like it could be rewarded or it could be overlaid on a banner. Because a lot of the time, if you're playing a more casual experience, you could be listening to music. You're not super invested in listening to the sound effects of the game always. So actually, when the person's doing a very simple one-tap game, an audio ad could be a good way to capture that user's attention. So we're definitely seeing that as something that's being explored more and more. And then there are a few other sort of more alternative solutions, like out-of-play monetization, which is where there's a company called Kindred for Business, UK-based company, yeah. So they offer like an extension that the user would install in their browser that rewards them in-game for shopping across like a selection of e-commerce sites. So it's kind of like an affiliate model, but it rewards longer player engagement. So if you're someone who has like longer shelf life products, so think like Sudoku word searches, like the stuff that Triple Dot make, like games where people play for an hour and they keep it on their phone forever. That could potentially be a monetization solution where you would be rewarded because your users have keep coming back to your environment and they've enabled this extension. So if they shop at Adidas and they get maybe 10% off their shop, but they also get a certain amount of coins in app for that transaction, it's like a win-win. You know, it brings some business to the retailer, it brings some discount to the user and some potential in-game currency for them, as well as value for the publisher. So I would say there's a mix of all these things happening, and every studio is trying to work out what makes sense for their environments, you know, based on the disruption or impact the user experience. But it's quite exciting. It's the first time in a while that there's something new that people are getting excited about.
Well, we've discussed a lot of trends just in regards to UA and monetization. So if there are any other trends that we haven't mentioned and you would like to bring it up, so I guess we missed Apple sideloading. It's something new, and I guess it might drastically change the market. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so it was kind of, I know we discussed it before we did the webinar as this, obviously, like for context, there's this conversation ongoing now where Apple could be effectively forced to allow other app stores onto their devices, right? This is something, I think a very public case of this was Epic Games had their like launcher for Android. So effectively you could install the game directly. And the reason why Epic would want this is they don't have to pay the commission to the app stores on any IAP purchases. Because obviously, like, depending on the setup, you're effectively losing, 10 to 20% of the actual transaction value going to the stores, which I understand feels like a bit of a monopoly because you don't have a choice, right? It has to go through their payment system. It's on their hardware. So it makes sense. It's very likely that Apple will be forced to allow this to happen on their platform as well, which creates a new, exciting and complicated opportunity for advertisers or for studios effectively. Because, so firstly, users that come to you directly are going to be much more profitable, depending on how you get them to come to you directly. Because there's still a cost of customer acquisition, right? So nothing happens for free. You need to market to these people or sell to them somehow. But it's also an interesting new channel because you can get a user to come directly to your installer, let's say, and effectively you'll be able to monetize that user without ever having to pay a commission to a platform, which, with the current pressure in the market on profitability and being able to operate at scale, that extra 10 to 20% could be a massive difference in your ability to compete. So it might not be an equal opportunity for everyone, because if you're quite small as a studio, there's probably a big upfront cost of having your own ability to install the app, directly with the consumer. And it's not just having the ability, you also need to find a way that you can market around that, make sure users understand it, blah, blah, blah. It can be challenging and costly. But then you think about the Take Two scenario, right? Where if you're Take Two, you can position yourself as a premium destination for gaming across a bunch of different genres. It could be very conceivable to have your own Take Two gaming center, right? Where you can play all of these different products from Zynga, Social Point, Popcore, Rollic, completely free, ads free, and because maybe remove ads completely because they'd focus on that extra uplift from IAP. Not to say that I've got any indication that that's a strategy that they would have, but the big players that have the resources could really find some ways of going direct to consumer, which is the first time that's really been possible at scale, potentially. So I wouldn't say it's a trend yet, because first that decision needs to be made, but then I think the implications are quite interesting. There's even opportunities for someone to start a new app store effectively at one of the other platforms. So it's an exciting time to be alive.
Yes, and to toughen up the competition that is already quite difficult to manage. Okay, so I'm sure we will see new trends on the rise in 2023, in 2024. So thank you very much for this discussion. For me, it was quite valuable as I've gained new perspectives, new visions on some points. So if you have anything to add to our listeners, just to mention something that we haven't discussed. So you're welcome.
Yeah, no, I'd say just as a small closing remark, because we kind of joked a little bit throughout, is when I look at everything combined, I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had. It's never been more competitive than it has now, but I don't think that should get anyone down. It's just puts an emphasis on the importance of having the right team, investing in the right tools, and actually having a strategy. I think a luxury of just trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what would work is a luxury of yesterday. I think these days it's important, whether companies work with, companies like you, like Apptica, to get data on what's actually working in the market with different advertisers. What are the creative strategies people are using? What are the platforms that are delivering the best results? I think it's just important to partner with the right companies to make sure you're sanitizing your approach before you waste your limited investment that you have. So I think the message is it's very complicated out there now, and speak to experts like us, speak to other game studios, and just work out where the opportunities are.
So with this positive and inspiring statement, we're wrapping up this episode. Thank you, Marc, for your time and for your insights. It's been really a pleasure. Follow the site of oolo to get more information on the solutions they're offering. It's a great tool. Yesterday we had a demo, so it was mind-blowing because it was difficult but insightful at the same time, so it was really great. And follow Apptica for new episodes. Stay tuned not to miss the next ones with more experts. Thank you to all the listeners for being with us. We wish you a nice day. Thank you, Marc.
Cool, and thank you very much for having me today.